Well, I hope you're all having a great evening this evening. I am your host, Hector, and I'm here with my co-host, Gilbert.
Hey everybody, what's going on?
Hey, everyone, and we're here with very special guest, Mark Collett.
All right.
Hello, although it is good morning from here in England because it's just gone past 8 a.m. But I'm a morning guy, so I'm very much looking forward to working with you guys. And thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
No worries. Oh, I also
Thank
realized
you,
I forgot
thank you.
to play the intro video, so I should probably do that now. All right. Enjoy the intro video, guys. We sort of did a little slightly out of order, but these things happen.
You're not English. You have to be white to be English.
Unless we begin to recover as a people and as a nationality and as an ethnicity, a sense of who we are.
All right, there we go. I do like a good old little Dark Age remix thing. They're always pretty fun. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you enjoyed the intro video. And thanks to everyone watching in chat and everyone that will watch the replay. I'm sure he does not need an introduction, but Mark Collett, he's a veteran of nationalist activism. Activism. Yeah, I've forgotten how to talk. Sorry, sort of going a bit too crazy. Yeah, activism in the UK, not Activision. He doesn't make Call of Duty games.
He doesn't work for Activision.
He's been a commentator in the nationalist scene for years, was involved with the BNP for roughly 15 years, and has been the leader of the Patriotic Alternative activist group for about the last half decade. Is there anything else I need to add to that, Mark?
I don't think so. I think that's a very kind intro. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and he definitely doesn't make Call of Duty games. You can find his...
No, if I did make Call of Duty games, I can guarantee you they would have zero woke garbage in them and they would play a lot better. I have played lots of Call of Duty games and I used to enjoy them a lot more a long time ago. But in modern days, in modern times, I've sort of fallen out with Call of Duty and I'm not such a big fan.
Yeah, I'm sort of the same way. I'm more of a Fortnite guy now. No, that's a joke, by the way.
Fortnite! That's so gay! Oh my god! What podcast am I on here? This is like the Homo Gamers early morning podcast.
No, not quite. I think that would definitely be the wrong podcast. But yes, he's written a book.
Wrong podcast.
Yeah, this is his book. Be sure to pick it up. Fall of Western Man, epic book. Still on his website. Sure to pick a copy or get the free ebook. You can't really. Don't have an excuse if it's free.
The thing is, I don't charge anything for any of my work. None of my work has ever gone behind any paywall. So it's basically available for free for anyone who wants it. Now, obviously, you can get hardback and regular cover versions, but the important thing is the message and that people, do pick up a copy. So, if you haven't read it and you want to give it a whirl, you can grab a free copy at any time.
Exactly. If it's free, you don't have any excuse, so give it a read.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, he's also, like I said before, leader of the activist group Patriotic Alternative. They've been going for what, 6 years, 5 years now? Still going strong?
Yeah, I think we started in, I think this is our 5th year or 6th year. I think we started in 2019. We started before the COVID the COVID lockdowns, and one of the things that did actually sting us a little bit is we had this great momentum going into the COVID lockdowns, and that really was a time where nationalist groups, especially street activist groups, were really harmed by sort of government legislation, which was obviously designed to see how much control a government could exert over its people. And boy, did they. That was a bad time. But we were very active in the anti-lockdown movement when that got off the ground.
Yeah, that was really white pilling. I remember all that, to see your people and just British people in general, their spirit, really rise up, and that I remember they were some of the, had some of the biggest protests in the world with signs and you could shove your vaccine up your and all that stuff was really great. That was really awesome to see, and it looks like we're seeing that again. But yeah, we'll come to that a bit later. Is there anything else we need to share? Any more links of Mark's, Hector, or?
Oh, I mean, these are just the intro links. I'm sure most of our audience already knows who Mark is. So, I mean, he's pretty much like the biggest voice for British nationalism, at least online. So, at least like ethnic nationalism. There's some, people you could say are sort of nationalists, like, I don't know, Sargon of Akkad and all these other people. But Mark Collett's like explicitly pro-white and for the native people of Britain. So
doesn't need to cover it in blue pills like Sargon.
Yeah, exactly.
Sargon's coming good of late, though. I mean, the problem is for people like Sargon, they were living on a shrinking island of sand, and that was that there could be some kind of, multiracial libertarian utopia. I mean, I remember when Sargon called himself a classical liberal. I remember when Sargon, was trying to, speak to everybody. Sargon was a guy that he wanted to. I mean, he even had that cringeworthy interview with somebody who was advocating for something I won't even mention on this stream because I don't want it to get flagged up on YouTube. And there was that famous phrase came from it where Sargon said, "Oh well, I suppose it depends." Yeah, you know the one. I'm not even. Yeah, I'm not going to say.
Yeah, thanks.
Bad choice of words there, Sargon. That one didn't age particularly well, but. But now Sargon is like coming good, and but he's got to come good because what can he say? You've got white children being brutally slain and murdered, and at the same time you've got a prime minister who took the knee for BLM and said that, look, everyone needs to support this righteous outpouring of anger from sort of the black and progressive communities over George Floyd, over something that didn't even happen in the UK. Yet 3 little white girls are brutally butchered by a Rwandan migrant. And what is the response from the same man who took the knee from BLM? Well, Keir Starmer's response is, there needs to be a new police force specifically to deal with far-right protesters. There needs to be facial recognition software, longer prison sentences. There needs to be an absolute clampdown on everybody's rights to stop these people expressing themselves. But why didn't he say that over BLM? When British monuments, statues, war memorials were being desecrated by, mobs of blacks and Antifa, that was all, as far as Keir Starmer was concerned, a legitimate form of protest. It was a legitimate way for people to voice their concerns over something that didn't even happen in Britain. But now white British people are up in arms, and white British people want to take to the streets. It's release the police dogs, get out the pepper spray, baton charge old ladies. That is the 2-tier policing that we're living under. Now, what does Sargon say in that case? What can Sargon say? Sargon can't then start saying, well, we need this libertarian dream, because there is no libertarian dream. And he knows now that this is largely, a battle to save, white Britain. And one
Yeah.
thing that's very clear about this is now when Sargon goes and speaks at these Tommy Robinson rallies, he's making a speech which is basically, a millimetre or two away from what I would say. In fact, in some cases, it's more or less identical to similar speeches I've made at anti-immigration rallies. That is very, very telling. It's very, very indicative of the times that we're living in, where former, quote unquote, classical liberals, are heading to the local, what can we say, sort of antique shop and dusting down a German costume that would be used by military reenactors. Sargon's there now in his peaked cap, making his speech, and that's really how far things have moved along.
Yeah.
And right now, Sargon would probably be described by the Labour Party as a far right leader for the things that he's saying, because he knows now the Great Replacement is real. And not only is the Great Replacement real, the fruits of the Great Replacement, the end result of the Great Replacement isn't just that we become a minority. Because, people at one time might have argued, well, all these people are going to come here, white's going to be a minority, but these people are going to look after us, they're going to care for us, they're going to run our care homes, they're going to run the NHS, they're going to make life better for us all. But that's just not the case. That's not the case. They're coming here, we're handing everything to them on a plate, and at the same time as handing everything on a plate, they are then stabbing our children. And to make it even worse, Labour have been in, I think it's less than a month. They've been in for less than a month. I think tomorrow will be, it's a month since the actual day of the election. So Starmer's been in for less than a month. But in that time, you've seen almost a complete collapse of law and order. And not only that, you've also seen something that's, again, rather unprecedented. The government have dropped any facade of immigration control, and on top of dropping any facade of immigration control, they've started to remove protections that helped white people. So the winter fuel allowance, which was something that would help white pensioners, help white families in need, that's being taken away. No winter fuel allowance for your grandma and granddad. That's going, because we need to make sure that these people arriving by the boatload on our southern shore get an even better hotel room. That is literally what Labour are doing. And you've got a picture up now on the screen of Yvette Cooper. Well, we had a race riot about a week ago in a multi-ethnic area of Leeds, a place where whites were, a place where I actually stood as an election candidate in 2002. And that area was a white minority back when I was a candidate.
Wow.
So I can't imagine how bad it is now. But it's very telling that our Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, she's a complete hag. And she, when that riot happened, she was like, oh, well, we're going to be talking to community leaders. We're going to be looking at a community-led response. We've got to make sure everyone's listened to. We've got to find out what the concerns of these people were. As soon as white people do something, there's no talk of meeting with community leaders. Literally, police are actually kicking people's doors in and dragging them out of their homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to add something real quickly. People are complaining about the Rumble link. Rumble broke our first link, so just go to our Rumble channel. There should be a new live stream there. So if you want to go to Rumble, be sure to check out the new link if you prefer that over YouTube. And on that note as well, if you want to support the stream, we can get super chats via Rumble. So that's a way to support the stream if you like what you're seeing. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just thought I'd tell people that there's a new Rumble link.
No. Look, as I say, I was just sort of dumping a little bit of information to how, to your viewers in New Zealand and Australia, just to how bad things have gone in just a single month of a Labour establishment. And look, I'm not saying the Conservatives were the right solution. They absolutely weren't. But people have often said the Conservatives are bad, but whatever the Conservatives, do, Labour will do on turbo mode, and that is exactly what's happening.
It's
and
nearly the exact
considering
same
what
here.
Keir Starmer's suggesting as a response to this, we are now moving towards a Stalin-esque police state, which
Yeah.
only applies
Yeah.
to white people. It's
Yeah.
not going to apply. And remember this as well. What was the cause of all of this? 3 little white girls in their summer holiday go to a Taylor Swift dance event, which they'll be looking forward to. They'll be getting dressed up. Look, I've got a 5-year-old daughter. I know what it's like when you go to one of these events. I went out on the other day, and we went to a princess event. So in the city that I live closest to has these events called princess events, and you go to them. There's free face painting. There's young ladies dressed up as Anna, Elsa, Belle, Rapunzel, and little girls get their face painted. The actresses or the cosplayers playing as the princesses, they sing songs, they take photos with the little girls, they give them hugs. The girls pose. Little girl, when they're face painted, they pose in front of a backdrop with a fairy princess castle on it. And these days are things little girls look forward to. My little girl, you've got 15-20 minutes of her going through her wardrobe, picking out which big dress she's going to wear, telling mummy how she wants her hair to be styled, which bows she wants in her hair. These little girls will have been looking forward to this event, and that's the kind of thing that happens up and down the country in these summer holidays. And some absolute monster that we've taken in, we've fed, we've clothed, we've given everything to people like him and his family. He then decides to make his way to this event, an event where children should be free to have fun, enjoy themselves. And he does the most sickening and unthinkable thing imaginable. He sees little white girls dancing, playing, and he pulls out a knife and starts butchering them. And the press are sharing pictures of him.
It's outrageous. Look at this. Just look at this.
That
They're like
make
showing him
him
when he's like 10. And the guy's like a 17-year-old.
Read the headlines. Read the headlines. They're running defense for him. They're calling him a choir boy, saying he was quiet, saying he suffered from autism, saying recently he'd had mental problems. He hadn't left his bedroom for weeks. He was depressed. The BBC loved him. He'd cosplayed as Doctor Who. He wanted to be the first black Doctor Who, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
The way they're writing this up is if he was the victim. Well, not one paper that I have seen has talked about the hopes and dreams of the little girls that have been murdered. But we've heard all about the hopes and dreams of the murderer.
Of a savage killer.
Sickening. A monster. A literal demon. Yeah.
And I'll tell you this now, there's been more crying. So after this happened, there was a vigil in Southport, and a guy turned up who looked like a Muslim, who had a knife, and this caused the vigil to turn into,
get a bit rowdy.
Violent.
Get a bit rowdy.
Yeah, it got a bit rowdy. It turned violent, and the wall of a mosque got pushed over. Okay, I've seen more wailing and crying on X, on Facebook, and in the media from liberals about that wall being pushed over than I have about those white girls being butchered. And that tells you the kind of people that we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that will cry bigger tears over a wall being pushed down
and a black
because it's
killer
attached to a mosque. Yeah.
And a black killer that dressed up as Doctor Who and wanted to be like, I don't know, stab people with sonic screwdrivers or something. But it's unbelievable. I mean, the media coverage is they're demonizing the mostly peaceful protesters that just want to pay their respects and demand change from the government that let this happen. These people were basically invited under consecutive Labour and Conservative governments into the country, and you're having like nearly like weekly, daily events where blacks, Arabs, like basically foreign interlopers and racial aliens are attacking the native white people, and most of the time it's children.
Well, this is what you kind of experience before a genocide. The cycle of genocide is it goes up in progressions, and you've got to intellectually and almost psychically stimulate people in a particular way to precede what that group that once you know the unwashed masses to do to another group. So this is exactly what is going on, and you know, it's just like, man, if people don't get it now, I mean, what's your feeling on this, Mark? I mean, do you, I mean, after this, it's like it's incredible that anybody is holding on to this, you know, liberal, I don't know, weird pipe dream of a fantasy, you know, any longer. And but you know, you did mention Sargon of Akkad, and you know that there has been quite a quite a sudden rise in anger from the British population. Are we starting to see kind of more of these people who were, you know, sucked into their, you know, sunny rainbow fantasy life that now they're kind of waking up and going, okay, you know, becoming racially aware, racially conscious? Is this sort of do you get any sense of that there's been a sudden shift in that, or your thoughts on that, Mark?
I think there's several type of people out there. I think there are people, broadly speaking, there are people that have some desire for immigration control, which is the
I
vast
think
majority.
most, yeah, I'd say
Okay.
Yeah,
like
and
80%.
then there are people who have no desire for immigration control.
Yeah, communists.
Yeah, and I think those who desired immigration control before will now desire it more strongly or wish for harsher measures. So somebody who would have just been like, well, look, you know, we need to stop the boats and we need to get rid of illegals, will now be saying, look, we probably need to stop all immigration and we need a complete review of people living in the country. So there will be a shift, you know, quote unquote, right. You know, I'll use the terms right and left, and there's always somebody in the chat who's like, "Oh yeah, but it's not actually right and left. It's more
like,
of a yeah." But you know what I mean. So there will be a rightward shift from people who already supported immigration control. So Sargon, to his credit, always supported immigration control. However, he supported it on the basis of not creating, you know, or restoring white ethno-states, but he supported it on the basis that, you know, we would interview everyone coming in would get an, you know, an IQ check, and you know, it would we'd create this nation that would ultimately be multiracial, but it would be the highest and best people from every race that would live under British values. Now, somebody like him has now come or moved further to the right, further towards my position. He's just like, look, completely shut it down, start deporting them. We don't want net zero. We want net minus 500,000 a year for 10 years. You know, so he's come that, and that's the general shift amongst the majority. Now, there's the minority who support open borders. Now, of course, a very small group of them may well be woken up by this, but that number would be tiny. And the reason most of these people support open borders is because they are true believers. They are ideologically wedded for one reason or another toward the idea of a multicultural, multiracial utopia. And to them, this is not a political thing. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about, Mark? Is this too early in the morning? Haven't you had your Red Bulls yet? Of course it is political. I'm on my second Red Bull. I know what I'm talking about. Bear with me, guys. Bear with me. The issue here isn't political. It's religious. These people view the multicultural Marxist melting pot as a religion. This is their faith. And it doesn't matter how many white girls are sacrificed upon the altar of multiculturalism, it will not change their mind.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, if you're a Christian and you believe that it doesn't, you know, if you believe in God, it doesn't matter how many bad things happen to you. That is just, you know, that is just God testing, your will, your resolve.
Right.
The passage in the Bible where I believe God tests Job, and God and the devil have a conversation, and the devil says, look, Job will turn upon you if you keep testing him and make bad things happen to you. And God says, no, I believe he won't. So God actually lets bad things happen to Job, and Job, retains his faith. But that's because belief in God is a faith. It's a belief in something higher. And you've got to start looking at these multiculturalists as cultists, as people who believe in this multiracial, multicultural utopia in the same way that, Christians, Muslims, Hindus view their religion. And to them, something like this is just a test. Something like this is just a spoke in the wheels, but we've got to get, it's a spoke in the wheels. But the fact is, we've got to get back on that bike and keep heading down that road. These people will always feel this way. And the majority of them, they will now be more concerned when anything like this happens. They're more concerned that people lose their faith than they are about the disaster that's unfolding. They will be rushing around trying to prove now that they still believe, and trying to convince others that they want to remain believing that that believing is the right thing. They will be going around and saying, look, it doesn't matter what you've just seen. We've got to keep the faith. We've got to keep believing that this utopia can be achieved. And their way of achieving that utopia is pressing the fast forward button. So their way of creating the utopia is actually bringing more people like this killer here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just want to add to that on that point. Like, have you noticed that like conservatives, liberals, whatever, they've just stopped arguing for the supposed like positives of mass migration now? They used to go, oh, it keeps the economy growing. Oh, they need it so that they can look after us when they're old. Or, we get these skilled migrants that we really need to grow the economy. Like now, they just don't even do that. Like they've just sort of given up. Like everyone's sort of seen past the lie. Something like, I don't know, 70% of the population can just see that mass migration is just a scam and part of white genocide. And it's just to replace the native population with a sort of brown sludge of human interchangeable, basically workers. Like they want the whole country to just be like brown interchangeable economic units. And there's no actual arguments now. Like everyone knows that mass migration doesn't improve your standard of living. It makes your communities like low trust societies. You've got violent criminals coming in illegally that are killing people, stabbing people, assaulting people, robbing people. There's just no benefits, and they just don't even seem to try anymore. They just go, oh, you need to have mass migration because we said so, and that's basically all it is now. I at least see that in New Zealand.
That's a very good observation, and it's funny you saying that, because I actually was talking to somebody privately the other day, and I said exactly the same thing. I said at one time, when anything like this happened, there would be this absolute coping in the media, and all these people would be wheeled out to say why immigration works. So you'd have somebody coming out and go, well, what would we eat if they weren't here? Are you going to cook your own curry? Are you going to prepare your own kebab meat? And then there's somebody else come out and go, what would we do? Are you going to work in a care home and wipe elderly patients' bottoms? Oh, I certainly wouldn't do that. Who's going to clean the toilets? Who's going to drive the Ubers? And people would come out and try and make these arguments. And at one point, people would be like, well, they've got a point, etc., etc. But now those points are so ridiculed, they're so overplayed, they're so memed to death that the left know they look stupid saying that. So there was, and I think one of the turning points in this was the Molly Tibbetts case in the USA, because in the UK, and I'm assuming it's the same in the US and in many other Western countries, when things like this happen, the security services go to the the parents of the murdered
Yeah.
child and
Yeah.
say, look, this is what we want you to say. We don't want you to attend any protests. We're watching you now, basically. And sometimes they have done this in Britain. They've even offered victims' parents sort of money, jobs with the local Labour Party, etc. Jobs on campaigning groups. So they'll say, well, look, we know knife crime is a black problem. We know your child got murdered by a black with a knife. We know that, you know that, but we can't say that. So how about we offer you this role, and the role will be, you'll be the spokesperson for anti-knife crime in the UK, but you always must just call it knife crime or youth crime. You can never tie it to the people who are overwhelmingly responsible. And in America, there was a girl called Molly Tibbetts who was killed by an illegal migrant. I think she was actually raped and stabbed to death as well. It was a hideous case, and her dad came out and made this sort of statement that like people shouldn't be annoyed about it because he liked Mexican food.
Ridiculous!
It was insane. How
got
do you
mean to death? There was like all these cartoons of him, stood over his daughter's body or his daughter's grave, like slurping down a taco, saying, but I love multiculturalism, eating his taco. And these things now are so memeable that even the left, who are probably one of the most socially unaware groups in society, by socially unaware, I mean they can't read the room. They don't understand how normal people think. Even they're saying, look, we can't come out here now at the moment and say, well, we need people like this murderer and his family because kebab meat and chips. We can't talk about kebab meat and chips on this one, guys. If we start talking about kebab meat and chips in this case, every kebab shop in the country is going to be torched overnight. So
it's like in this case of Rwanda, it's like they don't even have good food. What do they eat there? Like fried rats? It's like we definitely don't need that. So the argument doesn't even work there. The ridiculous argument doesn't even.
Well, the argument for this is gonna educate you guys overseas, but the argument in the UK for people like these Rwandans is we now have an aging white population, and that's because of liberalism. So liberalism tells women, well, both liberalism and conservatism work hand in hand on this. So liberalism says, you need to be free. Working will set you free. Well, I know another group of people who said work would set you free, ha.
Yes.
But so work will set you free, ladies. So we want you all to go and have careers. And at the same time, conservatives are like, yes, we also agree with this working thing for women because, there's some sort of 30% of the population who are sat at home having children. We want you to go and help with the GDP plan. So what happens then is fundamentally women go out into the workplace and they take up jobs. So they're not having children. At this point, the government says not enough women are having children. We need to import migrants to look after the elderly. And it is quite often
it's a
these
Ponzi
African
scheme.
migrants.
That are committing crimes.
It's quite often these African migrants, though, who are imported to primarily look after elderly white people. So they will now say, that they're sort of dropping the ethnic food tastes good, it's worth dying for. I mean that could literally be mass immigration's tagline. Like McDonald's have like what was that thing? I'm loving it. Well, it could be food good enough to die for. That could be the multiculturalism selling point. Food good enough to die for. And this is where we are. But now they can't really say that anymore because people are getting tired of hearing that. So now you will generally hear them say, well, who would be working, wiping old people's bottoms? Who's going to stand there putting the UV drip into grandma's arm? And that's the argument they're making now. But this argument is also a broken argument because there was absolutely no need
because migrants are
for
suppressing
grandma
wages
to be cared for by these people.
Migrants are suppressing wages, 1, and 2, we should be able to take care of our own grandparents. It's not that hard. It's not that hard to figure out. And just talking about, this is just related to the thing of mass migration and how it supposedly improves society. In New Zealand, our society is being improved so much by mass migration that we've got 60,000 Kiwis fleeing the country this year.
Boy,
year
I
to
tell you
year.
what, I'm just worried about the beaches. You know, I do like to go to the beach, but I don't want to go there and poop all over it. You know, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I should just install my own. No, but yeah, I mean, this is. I mean, I mean, for our New Zealand viewers and our Australian viewers as well, which are experiencing a similar thing, you need to look at this and you need to look at what's happening in Britain and say to yourself, this isn't just happening in Britain. This is happening in New Zealand too, and we got to take this seriously, and we've really got to make a stand in any way we can. And of course, you know how what Hector and I have advocated you do, that you've got to get involved in this political system, and you've got to warn others, and you've got to get smart and get other people to get smart, because you know this is just the whole way it's going, and we're on a full, you know, steam train right the way there. That there are so far there are. I mean, there are people, you know, warning, saying we need to stop these breaks. Like Mark Collett, he's been a British lawmaker or something. He's been doing this for so long, but you know, he needs our help. You know, and we need your help to, you know, stop this happening. We all have to do something, everybody. And I just you know, on what you were speaking, talking about, Mark, this is such a big thing. This is such a uh, unbelievably, unimaginably nightmarish and heinous thing. Do you think, especially with the way things are going right now, does this represent the end of the establishment media and an inflection point for all of Britain and or all of Britain's sort of liberal political elite? Do you think this is a big, you know, do you think this is it? Because, you know, I think after the BLM riots in America, you know, there was sort of this understanding amongst a lot of normie people, like, okay, like, you know, we can't ignore this anymore. We all know what that was about. So what is this? Is this, you know, the inflection point where, you know, people start to look to people like you? What are your thoughts on that, my friend?
I think, and this might be a little bit depressing, I think that people will look to people like myself. They'll also look to people like Tommy Robinson. They'll look to people like Sargon. There will be a growth in outsider politics. However, in terms of votes, I think the party that will gain from this will be Nigel Farage's Reform Party. I think politically, at the moment in the UK, he has that completely sewn up. And he has that sewn up because he's a member of parliament, which gives, you know, which was
Yeah,
unprecedented to
massive
get an
boost, to be fair.
anti-immigrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a first to break that watershed. He's also done several other incredible things in his life. The first is he won 2 national elections outright, one for UKIP and one for the Brexit Party. There has never been an outsider party that has ever won 2 national elections before. And finally, he also brought about Brexit. So he's got this record of doing things no other politician has done. He's got this legitimacy. He's won 2 national elections on the bounce, one for UKIP. They were European elections, but they were national elections. They weren't, you know, not they weren't parliamentary elections here in the UK, but they were for MEPs. But he did win 2 of them. So to win 2 national elections, no one else has ever done that before. No one else has ever beaten the establishment in that way. He's also brought about Brexit. So he's shown he can get things done and bring about lasting social change. And on top of that, in the entire history of British Parliament, there has never, ever been an anti-migrant politician elected to Parliament, with the exception of people who were conservatives and switched parties. But no candidate has been elected under their own steam before. So yes, UKIP had MPs, but they weren't really UKIP MPs. They were Conservative Party MPs that defected to UKIP to make a statement, and they got re-elected. But no candidate has been elected under his own steam as a fresh MP. Farage has now broken that taboo. So he's going to have a kind of, how can I say, he's going to have a power that no other political leader on the right has ever had. And what's more, we have something in the UK called parliamentary privilege. And parliamentary privilege means you cannot be arrested or sued for anything that you say in Parliament, which means he is the only person in the country that can honestly talk about this issue. He's the
Yeah.
only person that can walk into Parliament and say, this is what really happened. Now, at the moment, the media are lying. The media are saying this is all white people. The media are refusing to cover the thousands of Muslims that have taken to the streets with clubs, bats, machetes, gardening tools, knives. The media aren't covering that. The media are miscovering things that have happened. So, or misreporting. So yesterday in Hull, 2 members of an ethnic minority drove their BMW at white protesters. The white protesters jumped on the car, dragged them out of the car, gave them a kicking, and the media are saying disgusting racist
Yeah,
mob
I saw
attacks people just out for a day
Yeah.
shopping. That's not the case. I've seen the footage. They were driving at protesters. Now, can you imagine if I jumped in my car and sped at BLM protesters? The media would have literally been egging those people on to drag me out of the car and beat me to
Yeah.
death.
Yeah.
So what's happening now is the media are lying, the politicians are lying, but Farage is in this interesting position. He's broken all of these taboos. He's broken all of these previously unbreakable barriers that no other anti-immigration politician has broken. But he's now in a position where he can actually talk freely and honestly. Farage could go into Parliament on Monday. He could take it to the floor and he could say the truth on this. Whether he will or not, I don't know. But him and the Reform Party MPs are the only people who are anti-immigration in this country that can speak freely about this without being prosecuted. That's a big thing.
That is a big thing, and that's actually really interesting because in your time as a politician and rallying for the BNP and things like that, you've mentioned how you've tried to, you've gone door knocking, tried to talk to people, and they would say, "Oh, that's all very well and good, but why should I give my vote to you since the British electoral or voting system is kind of funny there? Like if you have outside the 2 main parties, the vote doesn't really count." I may be butchering that definition of that, but with Nigel Farage's party, this thing, do you think things could be different for this outsider party now, especially as things go on?
Well, they're not out. That's the thing. What you're saying is actually quite accurate. What you hear people say regularly is there's no point voting for anyone outside of the Conservatives and Labour because they're not going to win. So
Right.
there was this sort of thing that you're wasting your vote. And essentially
Yeah.
you are in a democracy. In a first past the post parliamentary system, if you vote for anyone else other than the winning candidate, you've wasted your vote. So if there's 10 candidates and one candidate gets 12% and every other candidate gets an equal share of the vote, the only votes that count are the votes of the 12% that voted for the winner. They're the only people being represented. So there's this thing that people say when you're knocking on the door, when you're speaking to people, voting for you is a wasted vote because you can't win. Now people know that Nigel can win. There's going to be they've done it. They've broken that barrier. The dam has got the cracks in it. The water's pouring through. This can be done. And because of that, you are likely to see at future by-elections and the next general election a serious increase in people willing to vote for reform because they know that reform can do it. And that's part of that's always been part of the problem. And I experience this, I've knocked on people's doors and I've said to people, look, will you vote for me? Will you vote for the BNP? And they've been very honest. They said, look, mate, I agree with everything you say. I agree with every word of what you guys stand for, but there's no point voting for you because my family have always voted Labour. You're not going to win. you know, my dad would turn in his grave if he thought I was going to vote for anyone different. And off this guy goes to vote for more mass immigration, even though he doesn't agree with any of it, because he's a Labour man, because he doesn't want to see the Tories get in. And
Astonishing.
these are the problems that you face. Look, I'm not going to go into this too much because I actually did a 2-hour sort of like video lecture on this, followed by questions and answers, where I explained all the nuances of the British electoral system and then backed it up with real world examples from nationalist candidates who've stood in elections, which made for a pretty interesting video for those who are deeply interested in the electoral. So it's not a video for everyone, because not everyone's, you know, that invested in elections. You know, a lot of people don't believe in them. A lot of people outright say, I just want to do the protests, or I just want to do, you know, I just want to do the active club stuff, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, you know, when it comes down to it, what Nigel Farage has done will cause people to view British politics in a different way, and that is a good thing. And a lot of people are going to say, well, look, Mark, is Nigel Farage perfect? Well, he's absolutely not perfect. And he will say lots of daft things like, look, you know, black people coming here from the Commonwealth is good because you know, I supported the Commonwealth. And, you know, he's more almost like Farage sometimes comes over as a bit of a larper, like like he's got this hard-on for the British Empire, and if we can create a smaller version of the British Empire on British soil now, with like, oh, here's this tribe that supports the Empire, and here's some nice little Indians, you know, that reminds me of the British Raj, you know, and all this nonsense. But you're not going to get overnight people voting for complete and total change. Everything happens in waves. It happens in increments. Sometimes things move faster than you think, but I don't think there's ever been an example of a complete hard shift to a new political dichotomy, other than when you have literally a communist revolution, but they still take years of bloody fighting to achieve. You know, there's not going to be a light switch moment where people wake up tomorrow and they go from, you know, liberal multicultural capitalism to sort of some kind of pre-war, you know, nationalist ethno state. That won't happen. We can get there, but you will get there in increments. And people like Nigel Farage represent part of that incremental change. And what's happening to now over this weekend is a massive shift. It's a huge shift. It's a seismic shift in the right direction. People coming out on the streets and saying, we don't care anymore. A Rubicon's been crossed. These white girls being stabbed is horrific. We're just not taking this anymore. Sorry, we're not taking it anymore. We're not having it. That's it. We're done, you know, and we're willing to come out and do something. That's a massive shift. That, along with Nigel Farage getting 6 MPs elected, and he got them elected, to be fair to him, on a more openly ethnocentric campaign than the BNP's was back in 2009.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
It's
things
actually
have
sort of
shifted
good.
That's
dramatically.
amazing. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Things have shifted dramatically, and they're the shifts that we want to see. We want to see these shifts, and we have to keep pulling the Overton window in our direction. Now, what there's no point in doing at this point is ignoring. Now, some nationalist groups sort of will ignore what's going on now, and they won't want to talk about it because they'll be scared of repercussions. Now, I'm not saying we need to go out there and Fed post. That's the opposite of what we need to do. Everything we need to do needs to be legal, above board. We need to call for robust protest, but we need to make it very clear that we're not calling for violence, because what we can't do, you know, things are going in our direction, but there is always a pendulum, and that pendulum can swing back. And what we don't want is to give fuel to people like Starmer, who at heart is a pro, you know, he's a philo-Semitic, cultural Marxist, Stalinist beast of a man. Okay, this guy would happily, you know, allow hundreds, thousands of white British girls to be stabbed to death, you know, as long as the boats didn't stop. That's his opinion. That's who Starmer is. And we can't give him any moral right to take away more of our rights and freedoms at this crucial time. We absolutely must not do that. And I am a big fan. You know, my opinion is this: if I was in charge of all these people who are out protesting, I would say to everyone, take Monday off work, get up at 5 or 6 a.m. and go and sit in peaceful silence outside every single government building, block Downing Street, block Whitehall, block Parliament, block your local council chambers, and stop these anti-white pigs from getting into their buildings. How long do you think Starmer and his friends on Downing Street would survive without their Deliveroo coming in, without their mail arriving on time, without the papers being delivered? They couldn't deal with that kind of thing. They wouldn't be able to deal with it. It'd be impossible for them. They would break down. They would crack. Now, that's what we need. We need peaceful resistance. We need a white strike. We need the white man to say, we're going on strike. What we can't do, and you know what we need to do when that happens? When the police start whacking old ladies and women with children and young men over the head with batons, when police dogs are baring their teeth, snapping at women with a kid in a stroller, that all needs to be filmed and put online. We need to show police brutality to white people, and we need to highlight to the vast majority of people who do want some kind of immigration control that we live under a two-tier system where white Britons are second-class citizens. That's the way it has to be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I perfectly. We had a thing in New Zealand in Wellington where we had these lockdown COVID protests, and the brutality of the police was just outstanding. They were pulling naked women out of their tents, punching old men in the face, setting things on fire. Just doing the most crazy, aggressive things. And but people all got that on video and all shared it all around the web. And people saw that, and that really, I think that really made the Ardern regime really crippled it to a great, and people saw that, oh, be kind, be nice, this soppy sort of wet bulldog of a kind of expression that she always did, pug chewing on a lemon. And it all just, it made it a complete facade that this is all a joke. But we need to do that for white people, for British people, because it is just insane right now how just how anti-white it really is, that people are not.
Look, about a week before all this, there was an incident at Manchester Airport in England where there was a brawl between Muslims who were obviously going somewhere or coming back from somewhere and police officers. And during that brawl, a white police officer appeared to stamp on the head of a Muslim man and then kick him in the face. And this was all over the press, and this was police brutality. This is sickening. Why is this being allowed, etc., etc., etc. This police officer's face was shared everywhere. He was shamed. People were calling for, his head. And we need to do the same. What we need to be doing is we need to be documenting every single one of these acts of brutality. We need to be taking pictures of the police officers carrying this out. We need to be sharing their names, and we need to be doing to the police what the Muslims and what other ethnic groups do to the police when they are brutalized. We need to be calling for our civil rights. We need to be shaming these officers, and we need to be saying, well, if every time a police officer arrests a black man and he has to use any form of force, why is the police officer's face put everywhere? Why are they being named and shamed? Why are they being stood down from duties, etc.? But when the police do this to white people, it's absolutely tolerated. This needs to be shouted from the rooftops, and I am absolutely 110% behind this. It needs to go out on Twitter. There needs to be online databases of all the times this has happened. This needs to be shown to every white person who has concerns about immigration, because the fact is, this two-tier policing is exactly the kind of thing that does lead to political change. It led to political change in the southern states in America. It was used by people like Gandhi in India when Indians were sitting peacefully protesting against British rule and they were attacked. This is the kind of thing that shows people that what we're saying is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory that white people are being turned into second-class citizens in order to facilitate a change that will see them become a minority in their ancestral homeland. That's not a conspiracy theory. And this policing, this two-tier policing, exposes that it's not a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy against white people. It's not a conspiracy theory. And this needs to be shown. It needs to be trumpeted absolutely everywhere. And I will say this, if you're out at a protest today, if you're out at a protest over the next few weeks, film everything. Everyone today has got a phone in their pocket that records in probably higher definition than Hollywood cameras recorded in sort of 20, 30 years ago. You're talking, even older phones like mine run in 1080p at 60 frames a second. Newer phones will run at up to 120 frames a second in 4K. These things need to be captured in as much detail as possible. And for those that can afford it, buy a head cam, buy a vest cam, buy a GoPro. Go to these events ready to capture everything and make sure when you are capturing it all, that when you get home, you put it on the internet. Don't just back it up to an extra hard drive or something. Put it on the internet. Put it somewhere where other people will archive this material so that we can have an actual database of police brutality. And don't be ashamed or shy of showing who these officers are, because no other ethnic group would be shy about doing that. And I can tell you now, we're seeing this video of this woman here being brutalized by these pigs, these pig cops who are basically pinning a woman to the ground, pinning her to the floor. If that was a black person, people would be screaming, "Let her breathe. This is George Floyd, but in the UK." But they're doing it to a white woman because they can. This is absolutely sickening. And I'll tell you this, every one of those cops in that video needs to lose their job, lose their pension, and
be put in prison.
They are, and they do. They need to be put in general population, so they get a little bit of what they're so happy to dish out to white women. And it's funny, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it, watching the cops do this to a white women, because cops love letting Muslims and other groups do horrific things to white women, and then when they get a chance to do horrific things to white women, they do as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's amazing. I mean, we need cameras everywhere, upload everything, British flags everywhere. Just I know that people might feel funny about this, but like the communists have their concept, and you have Red Islam. As a communist faction, that they have this a concept of permanent revolution. Well, I feel like now, the British people need to have like a permanent nationalist revolution or revival, maybe, of who they are as British people of Albion, and they need, permanent, just fighting back always, because I mean they're not going to stop, and so cameras everywhere, flags everywhere, make a big stink about it everywhere, and shame these people. I mean, look at this pathetic man bowing before
and look how different the cops are dressed. They're in full riot gear when it's like white people having a vigil for 3 stabbed like children under the age of 5. But if it's like black people shucking and jiving, saying we need more money for
Watermelon
damn
or-
programs.
Yeah.
Let white people be racist. The cops show up in like not plain clothes, but you know, their standard like day-to-day
Yeah, look at that. Look at that.
office.
Look at that.
Mm.
Worthless cop on his knees, shaking hands with them, giving them the thumbs up. Do you think any cop shook hands with protesters yesterday? No. And I'll tell you what, even if they wanted to, if they got caught on camera doing it, they'd be losing their job in a heartbeat. In fact, they might even be going to jail for it. You know, the fact of the matter is, this is the kind of stuff that illustrates to white British people why there is need for change. And I'll tell you now, if Starmer comes out on the back of this on Monday and calls for even harsher laws and calls for an even greater crackdown, and there's talk now that he's being advised to bring in COVID lockdown style
Wow, like that's actually outrageous.
We have that too. Actually, there was a document that people are freaking out about their renewed plans to lock us down. I haven't gone through the document yet myself, but I'm going to. But as you were saying, Mark.
No, he's talking about coming out even stronger. Like, you see, Starmer's a dickhead, and he could have avoided. Look, he is a dickhead. He could have avoided a lot of this. The way to avoid this would for him to come out and say, look, what's happened to these three girls is absolutely horrific. And I am as outraged as other people from white communities up and down the UK. However, the man has been apprehended, and, you know, he will face the full force of the law. And we, as a government, will be seeking the maximum penalty possible for him. We will also be looking into the background of his family, etc., etc. Then he should have said, I absolutely do support people's right to protest over this and hold vigils, because that is something that we support in a free and democratic society. And then he should have said, but I ask people who are thinking about doing things, you know, from any racial group, you know, I'd ask people from any racial group who are thinking about doing something that may be unlawful or violent this weekend to refrain from doing so, because this should be a weekend of national mourning for these three little angels. If he'd have said that, I think a lot of this would have actually been mitigated. But going out and doing a press conference where he basically said, look, the real problem here is a wall got pushed over outside a mosque, you know, and if you push any more walls over, you're going to see the full force of the law. Oh, but by the way, you know, there's not going to be any immigration controls or anything. Don't be ridiculous. You know, that was the most tone deaf sort of address to the nation that I've ever seen. And it was very telling, because he only gave that address to hand-picked journalists who gave him questions in advance. So it was a total setup.
Right.
But even the Daily Mail, who are simpering Tory weasels, said, well, I think Starmer might have failed to read the room on this one. And even some of these scumbag journalists were a bit like, I think you might have got this wrong, boss. You know, maybe back down a little on this one. But he couldn't back down. And the reason he couldn't back down is because he hates white people. And there's something else I want to say about this, just very quickly.
No, go ahead. Yep.
I talked earlier about the murder of the girls and how the girls were at this Taylor Swift dance event. And I talked about my experience with my daughter going to the princess event, where you get your face painted and you meet the princesses and you have a picture with them and you have a picture in front of the fairy castle. And, you know, it's full of little girls. He doesn't understand this. Yvette Cooper doesn't understand this. Angela Rayner doesn't understand this. Rachel Reeves, none of them understand this, because their kids don't go to those dance events. Their children don't, in the summer holidays, get dressed up in a princess dress and go and dance with girls who are getting paid £12 an hour for dressing as a Disney princess. Their kids go to special summer events behind lock and key. You know, if they do dance classes, it'll be in an exclusive studio which teaches ballet with an instructor who gets paid £150 an hour. These scumbags don't understand how normal people live. They don't understand our lives. They don't understand the terror. They don't understand how now every parent taking their kids to one of these dance classes or princess events is going to be looking over their shoulder. Is going to be clutching their daughter's little hand, thinking, is this going to happen here? Because they never feel that. They never feel the anti-white terror that normal white people feel.
Yeah, precisely. And we've Hector and I have always advocated, look, how can you trust anybody in this day and age when people are so clearly mentally ill? People really have to take care of their own kids now, and you know, and not you can't. How can you trust anybody in the schools or the media or whatever? You've got to protect your own kids. It's a very tumultuous time. I you know. There's a question I'm dying to ask, Mark, but I see you have this video up, Hector. Did you want to play this
Yeah,
first?
yeah.
Go
Because we
ahead.
were talking about Starmer, right? And
Mm,
his interview. So I actually had this lined up with Nigel Farage. Actually, he responds to it. But before that, actually, I do have a super chat I need to read. So
okay.
there's a super chat from Stasnik. It says, "Hi everyone, Mark. I mentioned Belfast on your PWR show on Wednesday. On Sunday, you had a big anti-immigration protest. That city joined by Collett, represented from Dublin. Cocklock? Kuklook? I don't know what you'd say. That's weird Irish names, represented from Dublin. This protest hosted. Together, a large group of people waving British Union flags and the Irish tricolour have been making lots of noise in the mainstream UK and Irish media. Lots of people describe this as incredible or a historic moment. What's your reaction? Do you think this is something you can build upon moving forward when it comes to unity between the English and Irish are facing the same threat?" So,
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a fantastic point. And this goes to show that, things are shifting rapidly. Things are shifting rapidly in terms of old alliances. So at one point, it would be unthinkable for people with an Irish,
like this, literally
tricolour
this.
to put their arms round somebody with an English flag that bears the loyalist red hand. The idea that loyalists and Republicans are now looking at the horrific anti-white crimes that are going on and saying, look, we've been at war with each other for decades and decades now. And this decades long battle over whether we're Catholic or Protestant has led to, hundreds, if not thousands of lives being lost. But really, we're not that different. We're not that different. But now, both of our communities are under far greater risk than they've ever been from these alien invaders. Our kids are being slaughtered, and we need to come together and stand against this colonization from these people from elsewhere in the world. And that, my friend, is a seismic change. The idea that overnight sectarian problems in places like Belfast can be forgotten in order to protect white children is incredible. And that's something that's never happened before. So I think, as I said, this is a shift in the Overton window. Like, you maybe only see once in a lifetime. And as I said, this comes on the back of these huge shifts with Nigel Farage actually breaking that barrier and getting elected to Parliament. Things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. Now, that doesn't mean that tomorrow we're going to wake up and the battle's going to be won and Starmer's going to be on, the Eurotunnel train to France to seek asylum. I mean, I wish. But what it does mean is that more and more people are starting to think outside of the old political lines, and they're breaking outside of those boxes that they've never broken out from before. And we are starting to see white unity from different groups that would have never have been unified before. And we need to keep this pressure up. We need to keep protests going. We need to ensure that protests keep taking place all over the country. And we need to keep these protests peaceful. Though. We need to keep things from spilling over. And what we need to do is make sure that Starmer and his horrible anti-white cronies don't have any justification to take away our rights. But then again, I think now in some areas, if they tried to bring in, new sort of COVID legislation to control people, that might
that's going to
cause
make
even
it
more
10
turmoil in the
times worse.
streets.
People were
Yeah.
sick of COVID. I mean, you had massive protests here, you had massive protests in the UK. And you're going to have like bring in COVID style lockdowns because people are holding vigils for stabbed children, and like Muslims are trying to like stab them with machetes. I think you're like, it's ridiculous to think that that's going to be a solution that the people are going to accept. But anyways, we'll see. We talked about Nigel Farage and Starmer. Let's see what Farage actually had to say to Starmer, and whether it's good, whether it's bad. Let's have a look, shall we?
So the Prime Minister tonight reacting to what has happened over the course of the last 48 hours. His conclusion, very simple, it's all the far right, as if they're causing all of the problems. No, the far right are a reaction to fear, to discomfort, to unease that is out there shared by tens of millions of people. Let me be clear. I don't support street violence. I don't support thuggery in any way at all. But I'm worried not just about the events in Southport, but about societal decline that is happening in our country. Law and order, folks, on our streets is breaking down. This Prime Minister hasn't got an earthly clue how to deal with it. We need to start getting tough. We need to use stop and search, regardless of the colour of the skin of anyone that gets stopped. We need tougher prison sentences for anybody carrying a knife. We need folks to get real, because I tell you what you've seen on the streets of Hartlepool, of London, of Southport is nothing to what could happen over the course of the next few weeks. Let's have proper law and order. But Mr. Starmer, just to blame a few far-right thugs to say that's the root of our problems doesn't work.
So yeah, I mean, it's sort of a good take there, but like you said, he doesn't actually talk about mass migration and deporting all these interlopers.
Mr. Chairman, Director Rowe, can you put your first...
Okay, that just autoplayed. But he doesn't actually talk about mass migration and deporting people that are drains on society. Obvious interlopers aren't actually British stock, and thugs and criminals from society. So I mean, it's like a halfway measure, but at least, like you said, that's what Starmer should have said in his address. Oh, we're gonna, crack down on knife crime, whether they're black or white or whatever. Like very sort of
Look,
medium
from a
take.
British perspective, and actually being factual, what he said is actually incredibly factual. Now, a lot of people won't know this, but we used to have stop and search laws in this country that were very robust, and people generally got stopped and searched if it was a large group of males that looked suspect. Walking around in hoodies, faces hidden, baseball caps down, they would get searched. The problem was most searches would happen to black youths because they're the ones who go around in these gangs dressing like that. So more black youths would be searched. But not only would more black youths be searched, more knives would be found on the people searched, on blacks, than were found on any other group. So what did the Conservative Party do? And this was the Conservative. This was actually Theresa May before she was the Prime Minister. I've actually got a video on my Odyssey, my Rumble, and my BitChute if you want to dig it out. Not now, obviously, but after this show, if anyone wants to actually have the information on this. And this vile harpy hag Theresa May stopped the stop and searches from happening. It actually said, look, this is terrible. Now, the reason she stopped stop and search was not because it wasn't working. It's because it worked, but it showed that there was a racial inequality in those carrying knives and those carrying out this specific type of crime. So she literally said, we would rather have more stabbings than prevent the stabbings if the stabbings are going to be carried out by black people. So because she knew stabbings were carried out by blacks, she was happy to let those stabbings continue rather than address the elephant in the room. And that is the kind of monstrous decision that gets made. And look, let's stop thinking from a white point of view for a second, right? And that might sound like an odd thing to say, because obviously I'm probably Britain's most famous, openly ethno-nationalist pro-white advocate. But let me stop thinking for just 1 second as a pro-white activist, and let me start thinking, if I can, as a black person, as a black woman, if I could do such a thing. Now,
shit, I need some fried chicken.
There you go.
if you're a black woman, why would you want stop and search to be discontinued? Because the vast majority of people who actually die of knife crime are young black males. If you're a black woman, if you're a black mother, you would surely want stop and search, because stop and search might be the thing that saves your son's life. When your son and his friend go down to the shop to get, a can of Coke and some Haribo, stop and search might be the very thing that means he comes home alive, because that gang stood outside the shop staring at people going in and wondering if they can rob them. The police used to have the power to search them. They don't anymore. Now, stop and search, did prevent a degree of this, but it had to be stopped because it didn't result in a politically correct outcome. It didn't say that, well, white Britons make up 75% of the population, so of stop and searches, white Britons are 75% of the stop and searches, and of people who, knives are found upon, well, 75% of them were white Britons. No, the results were, people living in Britain who are of black or Afro-Caribbean descent, make up 6% of the population, but of stop and searches, they make up, 60%. And of people found with knives, they make up 72%. So because of that, it had to be stopped. So now knife crime's out of control. And no police officer who valued their career would have dared to stop that Rwandan knife-wielding butcher in Southport. No one would have dared walked up to him. No officer would have dared walked up to him and say, look, can I check your bag, please, son? Can you please turn out your bag? Because if they had have done, they would have risked losing their job. And even if they'd have asked him to turn out his bag and found his knife, there would still probably have been an inquiry as to why the officer, even though they found the knife, there'd have still been an inquiry as to why the officer chose him for a search, which puts you in a position where the police themselves would rather white girls were stabbed than actually search black people, because they know they'll lose their jobs if they do.
Well, they should bring back stop and search, but only do black people. Like, that should be like the actual. That should be the new policy, really, if you lived in a sane society.
Well, look, how old are you guys?
Yeah, I mean, late 20s.
Late 20s, right. The reason I ask that is not to be sort of condescending, but just to see if you actually remembered this. So, can you guys remember the 7/7 bombings?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
I was a child
Right,
when
so
that
the-
happened. A very young
The
child. But I do
7/7
remember.
bombings took place in 2005. Okay, so it's quite some time ago. I remember them because I was politically active, and after they happened, I designed a leaflet about them immediately. And BNP activists were out on the streets delivering these leaflets, saying, "Look, we warned you guys this would happen." Now, the interesting thing about the 7/7 bombings is they took place in the UK, in London, and the perpetrators were second or third generation Muslims born here in Britain that had been radicalized here on British soil. And the most famous picture from that terrorist atrocity was a famous London red bus that had been torn to pieces by a bomb blast, and the bomb had been concealed in the backpack of one of these Muslim terrorists. Now, here's the interesting thing. After that, there was announced to be a new policy. So British police were to search people heading into the London Underground that had backpacks on. They were to search, at random, people who had these backpacks on that were going onto the London Underground. And at the time, there was an increase in, or there was, people started producing clear backpacks. So you would get, like a rucksack that was made out of clear plastic, so you could see, clearly what was in them. And this became a little trend for a while. But I saw images at the time of like parents, white parents, walking, towards the underground. Who've got like a 5 or 6 year old little girl who's got a Disney princess backpack on, and the police stopping them and saying, "Look, we're going to have to check this little girl's backpack." And at the same time, they then have to ignore a Muslim woman with a backpack because they've already searched 2 Muslims. And at this point, it's looking as if they're searching 3 Muslims for every one white child. Well, why would you be searching a white toddler? How many white toddlers have blown up a London bus?
I'd say 0.
But because of diversity, because of quotas, because of tolerance, because of colourblind policing, the searches had to be carried out on, little girls who had backpacks as well. Because, it's all colourblind. Who knows where the next terrorist attack could come from? Maybe it could come from that little girl. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but that is literally the message that the police were putting over. And this is why, it's one of the reasons, obviously, the key reason for all of this is mass immigration and demographic change, and everything is downstream from there. But then there is horrendous policy making that makes multiculturalism and multiracial societies even worse. So it's not just bad enough that they all come here. It's not bad enough. If it wasn't bad enough that we're sort of importing murderers and terrorists and killers, we then have to turn a blind eye to them, because if we monitor these people, if we search these people, we're then racists. At that point, you're on this absolute hiding to nothing, aren't you?
Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, that's what to do, except that I think it's important to also realize that there is something of a greater reality to all of this. And there are people who are, in fact, very centrifugal in terms of promoting these things. And I'm really curious. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, Mark, to see if you smell anything funny, a little bit fishy with this event, and things that are happening around the world. I just want to give people a really quick timeline recap, which I've given before. In the U.S., we have July 15th, J.D. Vance vows to strike Iran. July 16th, U.S. Secret Service receives intel of a supposed Iranian assassination plot. July 19th, Trump vows to stop Iran nuclearization. Okay. 24th, Netanyahu reiterates claim of Iranian assassination plot, and then Trump demands Iran be destroyed if he's assassinated. And we had the Bibi Netanyahu speech recently. That was very vehemently, we have to all go to war again. And we have, Tommy Robinson just, like a spell, sort of just amassing, like summoning 70,000, 100K people in these rallies. And, of course, we know you've told me that, Starmer's wife is Jewish. And apparently, and like Biden, the Biden administration, his the majority of his cabinet is Jewish, at least half, if I have that correct. And I just think, is there something to this event, this tragic, horrible event? Is there something that we're missing? Could this be? Is this being used? Maybe not. Could it be? Maybe this, it wasn't intended this way, but is this being used to drive us into another, Iraq, or into, something else? I just wonder how, because they always like to, mold things to their something positive for them, and did you have any thoughts on that? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I do, and I think
Okay.
I don't think there's anything about this which actually plays into the system's hands. Now,
Mhm.
if this guy had been a Muslim, and I know that Tommy Robinson and I don't get on about
Well, had
a
that
lot
thing
of
of Tommy
things because
Robinson.
he's very pro-Zionist and pro-Jewish power, etc. But Tommy Robinson supporters have been desperately trying to sort of meme this into, oh, he was a he might have been a Christian, but he'd actually
he's
just
Christian.
converted. He'd secretly convert. Yeah, this black guy's a Christian. He was a choir boy. I said that at the
Christian
beginning.
and British. He's born in Cardiff, don't you know?
Well, look, the thing is, look, I've said this for a long time. Islam is part of the multicultural problem, but it is not what Tommy Robinson says. Tommy Robinson tries to make out that multiculturalism fundamentally works, and the only spoke in the wheel that stops us achieving a decent, utopian society is Islam. So, multiculturalism would be a good thing were it not for Islam. That is the sort of Tommy Robinson message. Okay? Now, he would say straight away, and initially there was some misleading news. The name of the killer was released by people who I believe were, on the Tommy side of things, and they said the killer was called Ali Shakhtar. That wasn't the case. And then at the same time, other people were saying, no, look, this guy was a black guy. This guy looked, initially, people said he was Somalian, and he does look that kind of African. He had that strange sort of, almost sort of bulbous forehead, etc. That you would say, look, this guy's he looks very stereotypically, Somalian, but he was Rwandan, and people were saying, look, he's not Muslim. This guy's a black. Oh, he'll be a black Muslim convert. He'll be a black Muslim convert. That's what he'll be. He'll be a black Muslim convert, and he isn't. He is a black Christian, and that plays into not the well, these are Muslims, let's get fired up and let's go to Iran and kick some ass. This is actually something that vindicates my point that this is an issue of demographic change, and if you let people in from all over the world, whether they're black, whether they're brown, whether they're East Asian, whether they're Muslim, whether they're black Christians, we don't want them here. We don't want them here. They pose a threat to us. And, I've said this for a long time. If you look at the IQ range of people from these African countries, you can find some of these African countries, the average IQ can be 65. Now, that's the average.
Imagine that. That's insane. Imagine living in that society where you're surrounded by, like, black literal retards with the IQ of 65. It's insane.
That's below mentally retarded.
And you want to bring these people to civilized societies? How about just stay in your like desert, unproductive, like hellholes? I think that's a better. I think that's a better option for all of us.
I mean, if you go to these, you can actually go and have a look and see, what is the average IQ by country. And I'm there now and I'm scrolling through the list and I must be halfway down. And unless I've missed it, I haven't seen Rwanda, and we're already down to the average IQ being in the 80s. And it goes a lot lower than that. We're now at, Senegal is 77, Kenya 75. I'm still going down. I haven't seen Rwanda. So I've got to Rwanda. now. I didn't miss it. I didn't think I would. I've got quite an eagle eye for this. The average IQ in Rwanda is 69.95. So the average IQ is less than 70. So that's the average. So if you're thinking that's the average, what would be a low IQ? And if that's the average, roughly half the people in Rwanda will have an IQ of lower than 69, which tells you everything you bloody need to know, which is that the people coming here, they're not the kind of people you would want in a high IQ, high trust society. In fact, they couldn't build a high IQ, high trust society.
Did you hear what the communists were saying? We need these 70 IQ retards to literal retards to take care of our elderly. Come on, buddy. Who else is going to do it? We need these retards to take care of our elderly whites that we can't afford to take care of because our housing costs and costs of living are too high. Oh, we need them. Come on.
The thing is, this is but making these points is such a taboo these days. Oh, it comes from a position of hatred. It does not come from a position of hatred. This comes from a desire to protect our own people. This comes from a desire that we love our own, we want to protect our own, and that we want to ensure that white Britons continue to exist and live in a world which is worth living in. We talk about our will to survive, but living should be more than just surviving. Living shouldn't just be a
thriving.
battle for survival.
Yeah, it should be thriving.
Yeah,
we want our people to thrive.
To thrive, to grow, to have your children grow up in a world that is better than the world that you grew up in. One of the things that defines Britain through the ages is every generation has had a desire to create a world where their children will grow up better off than they did. And I know my dad was one of 9. He was brought up, in the post-war environment where children left school without an education, where often you had 13, 14-year-old boys leaving school to go and work in the fields, to help support their family, etc. A family of 9 would live in one council house. That was the reality for British children. And he grew up in that world, and his brothers and sisters grew up in that world. And all of them went on to own their own houses, to bring up their own families, and try and create a world for their children that was better than the world they grew up in. And I think they did that. I think that post-war generation created a world for their children that was better, and their children had a higher quality of life. And my dad, he wanted me to have a better quality of life than he did. But I've got to say this now. Will my daughter grow up in a world which is better, safer, and provides more opportunities for her than the world I grew up in? Well, the answer is unequivocally no. She will not. My daughter will grow up in a world where she's a second-class citizen, where she's under threat, where if she grows up to be an attractive, beautiful, desirable young woman, she will be almost hunted for those characteristics. And at that point, we reach a situation where, are we proud of what we've created? Are we proud of the world that, we're living in? And the answer is no. The answer is no, because for the first time in British history, we are going to be worse off, but not. And people say, well, it's previous generations' fault that we got here, and that's a valid point. It's the fault of previous generations that things aren't as safe as they used to be. People should have acted. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. But we're not even financially better off anymore. We're not even going to be financially better off, because people like Starmer and Yvette Cooper and Rachel Reeves and these absolute ghouls in the Labour Party are going to take every penny we have away from us to ensure that fundamentally we are paying for our own replacement. So my daughter won't even be financially better off. It's not going to be a case where we're saying, well, she might be at risk if she goes to the wrong area, but she'll be financially better off. Surely she'll be living in a bigger house. She'll have more space. No, we'll have less space, less access to the countryside, less safety, less money. Everything we have will be taken off us. And that's one of the reasons we have to fight. It's our duty as British men and women to fight for the next generation and to make sure that this doesn't get worse. And these scenes of unrest on the street, this is just, in my opinion, the beginning. As multiculturalism accelerates, as people see that the world is getting worse, more and more people will begin taking to the streets and willing to put everything on the line because they don't have anything to lose anymore. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
People feel they don't have anything to lose. When your kids are being butchered in the street, what is there left to lose?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point, though. It's because standard of livings are just dropping so much. I mean, there's going to be so much people of, my generation and even younger, like Zoomers, because of, the cost of living skyrocketing, the cost of housing skyrocketing. They're not going to have like a mortgage like the boomers. They're not going to have a career that they've worked for 40 years because of our gig society. So they've got more, like, there's nothing to lose, and younger people are going to be more radical than the boomers who set up their, like, gilded cage where they have their retirement, they have their one kid, they have their, holiday to Spain every year. We're not going to have the same thing, and standard of living is just going to keep dropping and dropping. As mass migration continues, you're going to have more blacks, like rabid blacks and Africans stabbing white children. You're going to have Arabs chanting to behead, like, the white Christians and native Britons and infidels. You're going to have like Indians trying to scam your grandma out of her life savings. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse.
Bombings, acid, just terrible things. So, I mean, Mark is right.
Well, you say acid attacks. A group of Muslims did turn up yesterday at one of these things and throw acid at people. This is the tyranny we're living under. Now, this is another reason why I despise the British media, and I can't overstate that. Journalists are scum of the earth, right? So I've talked about how much I hate the politicians and how much I hate the police, but oh my God, when it comes down to it, and when I say I hate the police, I probably don't hate individual officers, but the police force.
There's a lot of individual officers I hate, so I can say I hate
well,
a lot of them.
What I'm saying,
sure.
When you talk about the police, it's I'm sure there are individually decent officers still in there that are appalled by this and would like to go out and stop and search people and do the right thing. But generally speaking, when you say the police, you're talking about the force. You're talking about the power structure. Now, the issue here with with the journalists is the media are ignoring these attacks. The media are not talking about the Muslims that threw acid over a white British man protesting. They're not talking this morning about the gangs of Muslims that came out onto the streets armed to the teeth. They're ignoring this, and they're ignoring this for a very, very obvious reason. And that very obvious reason is that they don't want British people to see that this is a complete breakdown. This isn't far-right thugs going out and causing trouble. What this is the inevitable end result of multiculturalism. And do you want my predictions?
Yes, please.
Because obviously the stream isn't going to go on forever, but these are my predictions. People have said, look, this is the start of a race war. Okay. No, it isn't. It's not the start of a race war. People who say that are over-egging this.
Yeah.
This is the start of what we've seen in places like Northern Ireland, in places like Kosovo, in places where different groups of people live together who can't live together. Eventually, there is a violent separation. And that violent separation leads to the establishment of a sectarian society. And people who have an understanding of these problems, an actual deeper understanding, they know it's not going to end in race war. Did it end in race war in South Africa? Well, it's worse in South Africa than it is here in Britain. Did it end in, race war in Northern Ireland? No, it didn't.
Right.
It led to a violent separation, a sectarian society. And sectarianism is obviously something which is predominantly associated with Protestant and Catholic. But this new type of sectarianism is going to be based on, are you white or aren't you white? And there is going to be racial sectarianism here in Britain. Now, some of it will be with Muslim communities, some of it will be with black communities. But I'm going to ask this question. This is a rhetorical question. You guys can't answer it. But to anyone in the chat who is a parent, if you take your child out and you see a black guy with a hood or a mask on and a backpack acting strangely, acting fidgetingly, looking nervous, what are you going to do? Are you going to be like, oh, no, there's nothing to worry about? Or are you going to grip your child by the hand and start pulling your child away from that person? And that's the kind of distrust, that's the kind of worry that this will lead to. And if you want another bold prediction, now that people have seen what kind of societal chaos comes from such a knife attack, I will imagine that there will be dozens, if not hundreds, of migrants watching this who will all be thinking about doing something similar. There will be people out there now planning to do something similar because they've seen that this works. The days of creating outrage by, hijacking an aeroplane or blowing up a government building are long gone. Those acts are very hard to pull off. They're very hard to commit. And this is a grim prediction, but I believe terrorists and anti-white murderers will pivot towards this kind of behavior, this kind of atrocity, because it's far easier to get away with. And this isn't something I'm just saying now. I have consistently predicted this. And do you know why I predicted this? Because in countries like Nigeria, in African countries, terrorist attacks stopped taking place on government buildings, on military buildings, etc., because they were too well protected. Instead, terrorists just walked into supermarkets or shopping malls and did horrific things to people who weren't protected and would have no means of protection. Because the problem is, no government and no police force can protect every supermarket or every shopping mall. It's impossible to do, which gives people who want to do these things a much greater opening. And you can see now that this kind of act will lead to a much, much greater explosion in violence and much, much greater societal conflict than we've ever witnessed before. And that's a grim prediction, but that's where I think things are going.
You talk about these are the obvious endpoints of where a so-called multicultural society will be. Like every other multicultural society, historically, they've all just hated each other and they would commit violence against each other whenever they got a chance. So it's unsurprising that these sort of things are happening in the West, and it's just going to keep getting worse and worse as you have these liberals, communists, captains of industry, globalists that want to import the entire labor force into your Western country. These are the logical endpoints of multiculturalism society, is having these groups that hate each other, barely tolerate each other, and often commit violence against each other.
100%. Yeah, I mean, just look at these guys here. I mean, it's already happening. They're already coming out in violence. Their response is not, oh, peace and love and so on and so forth. They see people are angry, but they just double down with the lies and the violence, and that's their response, and that's their only response to anything. I mean, it is inherently a communist ideology in a lot of ways, is to destroy, not to create. Very, very feminine, but yeah, this is where it's going. I think your prediction is really on point there, Mark, and it's like now is the time. Now is the time for British people to rise up, and quite frankly, every white people everywhere to rise up, because it's not going to get any better. The time now is to fight, and fight hard, and get involved, get connected. Really make something of your life, and do something to protect your people. And I can think of no greater example than Mark Collett himself. I mean, I referred to him as being like the British Ron Paul in a lot of ways. You know, he's been at this a long time. Just look to people like him and what he's done, and you know, you'll be right on your way. But we all need to be like Mark, everybody. We all need to take this very seriously, because this is just one facet that these, quite frankly, what these reptiles. I mean, it almost makes me think David Icke is right about the elite being reptiles or something, because you know, I mean, their responses to this are just so. It's like not human. They're like silicone dolls or something, and their kind of facial expressions, and it's yeah, they really are quite reptilian. But so that's what we're facing, everybody, and you know, it's nice to be comfortable, but now's the time to fight. Now we need to really take it seriously.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you guys have any sort of closing statements on the riots and the violence that is happening now? I think we were meant to have other topics today, so we might have to. But I still want to cover the British election and the fallout from that. So, do you have any sort of closing statements on the situation with the, anti-white violence, the reaction to it, the reaction from the establishment, and where we go going forward?
I think that really, people must keep up the pressure on the system. But the fact is, along with keeping the pressure up in the system, they must do it lawfully. And I think there's a much greater need for being slightly more tempered, slightly more peaceful, etc. Because we have to not only be on the streets, but we have to be able to reach normal people who are still, who agree fundamentally that we need an end to mass immigration, but are somewhat nervous about, violence, who don't, who aren't willing to join us. We need to show those people that there is this huge double standard, that we are second-class citizens living under a system of two-tier policing, and that is why we as a group have to call for everyone to be on the streets, but to fundamentally do so in a way that doesn't lead to more of our rights being taken away.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have truth on our side, as I've said many times in the past. Our worldview is based in fact. Like utopians, liberalism and utopian communism are just based in fairy tales. Like the nationalist right wing, I don't know what you would call it, traditionalist Western worldview is based on facts. And that will help us over time as we keep getting proven right. Every single day we get proven right. There's no benefit to mass migration. There's no benefit to having these interlopers in your country. And the only way to fix it is basically to follow ideals like that we have, that Collett has, and many other people have. And we will just continue to be proven right every single day. It's sort of tough, but it is what it is.
And strength builds upon strength. So the only way forward for the British and all people of European descent is strength.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, one of the other topics I wanted to cover today, we sort of covered the riots for about an hour, 45 minutes, but
it's important.
Yeah, it is an important topic.
Yeah,
it's true. It's true. But I also wanted to talk about the British election, which was actually the original sort of reason why we wanted to get Mark Collett on stream. So, as you guys know, the UK has had a snap election. The Conservatives got absolutely trounced. The Labour Party is now in government, although they didn't actually do particularly well. And other parties like the SNP are sort of in the gutter. And you've had, Reform, UKIP, whatever you want to call them, Nigel Farage is sort of banned, finally get representation in Parliament. So I guess what are your thoughts of the election, Mark Collett, and sort of like what was the mood leading up to the election? What's the sort of mood now? I mean, especially now that the riots have happened, what's like people's thoughts on the new Labour government? What's their thoughts on the Conservatives and Nigel Farage and Reform? Do they think that the Conservatives can bounce back from this, or are they just screwed for eternity now? What are your thoughts on the recent election, Mark?
That's a difficult question, and it's a difficult question because can they bounce back? Of course they can. Will they bounce back? I don't know. If you look at the election results, they were very interesting, and they were interesting because in many ways this was a very standard election. It was a changing of the guard. Labour actually got fewer votes this time than they did with Corbyn, but the Conservatives got far fewer votes because Reform emerged, and many Conservative voters actually didn't vote Reform, they just stayed at home. So this led, despite Labour getting fewer votes, to Labour getting this epic victory, which was very unrepresentative of what the people wanted. So Labour took about a third of the votes across the country, but took something like almost 2/3 of the people in Parliament. So that sounds absurd to you, doesn't it? That tells you how undemocratic the system is, to suggest that a party can get a third of the votes but take 2/3 of the seats. That isn't democracy. That's not representation. Now, the Conservative vote, I think, is probably the lowest post-war Conservative vote, dropping to under 20%. Under 20% of the seats, but still maintaining just over 20% of the vote. Now, Reform did extremely well, taking over 14% of the vote, but only got a fraction of the seats, less than 1% of the seats. So this election, on the face of it, was a very standard election. It was an outgoing, long-term Conservative government leading to a Labour, on the surface, landslide majority. So almost a redo of the 1997 Blair coming to power election. Now, that is on the surface. Bubbling under, you saw something rather dramatic happen. You saw a slightly lower turnout, Labour getting fewer votes than they got when Jeremy Corbyn stood. So Starmer not being a popular government, Starmer being a minority MP, failing to take a meaningful percentage of the vote, which was totally, unreflective of the number of seats he actually won. The Conservative Party seeing, although they retained their position as the opposition, the Conservative Party, were taken to quite a low in terms of their representation in Parliament. And many of their voters, at the last minute, they all seem to be wanting to vote for Reform. But at the last minute, they said, look, we're not voting Tory because we can't, but we're not quite sure if we can vote Reform yet. So a lot of them stayed at home. And then Reform made this epic breakthrough, which wasn't epic in terms of the number of MPs, but it was epic in terms of the fact it happened, the fact that they broke this decades-old barrier of an outsider party, outsider anti-immigration party, getting somebody elected. So this all led to a situation that really primes Britain for an absolutely chaotic and tumultuous next general election. So I'm not really seeing this as the big change, but I think at the moment we are being set up for an even bigger change. And that's the key point. You might be thinking, well, what do you mean? How could you get a bigger change? Well, if you look, Conservatives are on the downward slope and they're falling out with each other. And they're basically saying, we have to have a black leader next time. Well, that's not going to help them, especially not in the current political climate after what's happened over the last few days. That isn't going to be, the big vote winner. That's not going to be the thing that conservative voters say, bloody hell, that's exactly what we need. What we need as conservative voters is a black leader of the Conservative Party. That's not going to go down well at all. Labour are going to be even more pro-migrant, even more open borders, and even more anti-white than the Conservatives are. That's going to make them despised. And now, Reform have proved it can be done, that they're not a wasted vote, that Reform candidates can be elected. So they've broken that barrier, there's no longer that kind of like downer about a third party that's anti-immigration. All of a sudden it can be done. So I think under those conditions, you're going to have more people say, well, actually, I'm definitely not voting Conservative now, or I didn't vote Conservative last time I stayed at home, but I think I can vote Reform now because they've proved they can win. And you can have a lot of Labour Party supporters saying, like, because most of these protests, most of this conflict that's going on our streets are in Labour areas. They're going to be like, well, I'm not voting for a guy who's just locked up my brother because he turned up and, protested against kids being killed. What could well happen at the next general election is Reform could end up with between 60 and 100 seats, because yes, they only took 6, but there was 34 where they came second. And I think Reform could be the party that breaks what's known in Britain as the red wall, that breaks into these Labour areas. And I think Reform could be the party that actually changes the political landscape in Britain forever, especially on the back of this, civil unrest.
Yeah, well, people say Reform, they only got 5 seats, but I mean, people have to look back. Back in 2015, they got 12% of the vote. It got 0 seats. So getting 5 seats is a, infinite improvement on that. And
6 seats, they've got another now.
6. Oh, do they have 6? I thought it was 5.
Another, yeah.
Oh, well, good for them.
Yeah, no, somebody crossed over immediately after the election.
Oh, well, I didn't
They
hear
won
about this.
5, but they've got 6 already.
Was it a Conservative MP that crossed over? I haven't heard about this.
I'm not actually sure. I've just heard that it is 6. So obviously, unless there was a recount and something was changed at the last minute, but I believe somebody defected. My knowledge on this is not. I'm sure they have 6 because the media keeps saying 6.
Right.
So I'm sure it's 6, but I don't know where the 6th came from.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's interesting because the way that a third party like Reform does rise is you simultaneously do need the collapse of the Conservative and Labour Party. You didn't quite have that. You had the sort of semi-collapse of the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party just sort of held its ground. It gained 1%, which is not really that much, really, considering how popular the Conservative government was. But there are tides changing, and when you look at this, like the mainstream parties, the 2 big parties, Labour and Conservative, they only just got over 50% of the vote combined. So half the country is already rejecting these 2, uni-party monoliths of a party. Although you could probably count Lib Dems in that as well. So people are rejecting the mainstream parties and going towards these different parties. Whether it's Reform, and even on the left, like the Greens made massive gains as well. They went from 1 MP to 4. So people are getting sick of these lamestream parties and are going to alternatives.
Yeah, it's really good to get Mark's temperature reading on that, because I'm curious. I was very curious.
Well, really, generally speaking, anti-immigration or nationalistic parties perform better under a Labour government than they do under a Conservative government. That's a fact. Now, the issue is here that the Reform Party is going to be the anti-immigration name on the ballot paper in forthcoming elections, and they are going to do very, very well. And under a Labour government, they will likely flourish far more than they would have done under a continued Conservative government. So I think what you're going to see here now is in forthcoming elections, and we're still a way off from these as well. So look, people shouldn't get too excited. Like I always try to explain to people, politics is a long game. It's not a short game. You don't get involved in politics, and then 6 months later, you're cheering on your boys as they're walking into Parliament and, completely dismantling and changing the whole structure of society. That's not how politics works. Okay, it just isn't. So we're now in August, very beginning of August. It's only the 4th of August today. And the next elections, unless there's by-elections or unless there's a situation where Starmer is so shook that he dissolves Parliament and calls a general election, which would be very unlikely. He could do that, but it'd be very unlikely. So the most most likely situation now is the next election will be in May of next year, the first Thursday in May of next year. And a lot can happen between now and then. And the next general election is likely to be somewhere between 4 and 5 years away. And obviously Starmer, as the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister with a sizable majority, has privilege. And that privilege means that he gets to decide what date that election's on. It has to be on a Thursday, but he gets to pick the Thursday. Obviously, he can't say, well, it'll be in 10 years' time. There is a limit. But, he has, from, the point he's elected, a maximum of 5 years in Parliament. And as I say, some, a lot of governments go far earlier than that. They don't wait till the 5 years runs out. They call an election much earlier, and they call it when they think they're at a high in the opinion polls, or in rare cases when they're actually, when there's actual real chaos, and they're saying, look, we want to go to the polls to prove that we still have legitimacy. But the likelihood is the next elections will be the local elections in May of next year. And at that point, I'm not sure how things are going to go. I'm not sure how things will work out. But if I was a betting man, I would say that Reform will stand the record number of candidates. And because they have the backing of not just an MP, but an actual parliamentary group led by a much loved celebrity candidate, Nigel Farage, that people trust, they like, they think, he's got a lot of good things to say. I would say that Reform are going to do electorally extremely well in these elections. And I think we're going to see more gains for them, but at a local level. And I think as time goes by under a Labour government, that will happen more and more, because statistically, Labour governments are governments under which anti-immigration campaigners, anti-immigration parties do much better. So the big takeaway from this election is that both of the main parties actually came out of this looking less popular, looking, as if they weren't actually enjoying the support of the people. Smaller parties came out of this very well. Historical barriers were broken. And I think this sets us up for a very interesting next general election. And obviously, in the first month of Labour's rule, society appears to be completely breaking down. So that makes it even more interesting. But obviously, 4 to 5 years away is a very long time. So who knows? A lot could happen between now and then. Things could get much worse. We could see a full breakdown of society into a sectarian style society. But, and I don't want to put a down on all this, we could also see a return to normality. We could also see Starmer come out on Monday, very unlikely, and say, look, we are actually going to review certain things, security at borders, and say what he thinks he needs to say to calm people down. Because you've got to remember, for the last 14 years, the Conservatives have been saying what they thought they needed to say to calm down the British public. The Conservatives have been lying through their teeth. And there is every chance that Starmer is going to be pulled to one side by somebody above him, somebody who's influential, one of his advisors, and just say, look, you are losing the crowd here. You're going to end up bringing chaos to the street. You've got to say what the people want you to say, and at that point anything could happen. But all things being equal, I think if there was a general election tomorrow, based on what we've seen happening now, Labour would take a kicking, the Tories would make new comebacks, would make no comeback whatsoever, and the big winner would actually be Reform. So all things being equal and everything continuing on this trajectory, which, I'd say the betting man would, the wise betting man would put their money on things carrying on this trajectory. It might not go that way. I've not got a crystal ball, but I can't see Labour backing down on this and backing white people. All things being equal, things are going to go more in the direction of Reform, and we're going to see over the next 5 years massive shifts in the Overton window. And huge gains for people who are anti-immigration and anti-multiculturalism.
Yeah, well, speaking of gains for people that are anti-immigration, do you think that reform could basically make a, massive showing like the National Rally has in France? They went from having no MPs 5 years ago to being the third biggest party and largest in terms of popular vote. They've absolutely
Yeah,
smashed it.
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I am saying. I'm saying that all things being equal, the biggest gains at the next general election, if it was held tomorrow, would be reform. As things currently stand, they would be the benefactors from all of this. And obviously 5 years is a long time away, so a lot could happen. So it's very difficult to say, because the general election isn't going to be tomorrow. But all things being equal, I can't see anyone else coming out there and benefiting from this as, Reform and Farage will do.
I sort of hope that the Conservatives elect a black leader because they need to stay unpopular. Like, that's part of the strategy is the Conservatives need to stay unpopular and not make some half-hearted comeback.
I can see them doing that. I can see them doing that.
Really? Okay.
Look, they're gonna do that. They're gonna do that. They are absolutely out of touch. The problem for these parties is what has come about from democracy, or where democracy has led. Democracy is meant to be this system of representation where normal people stand up and say, "This is what I believe," and other normal people back them. And at that point, there is representation for normal people in Parliament. It's not a system that's meant to create a political class, but it is a system that has created a political class. And because of that, I don't believe that, and I said this earlier about the dance classes and the princess events in city centres and things like that, these MPs don't understand the terror of taking your daughter to one of these events because they never have and they never will. But once you create this political class that is extremely and almost totally out of touch with normal people, it leads to a disconnect. And that disconnect leads to policy making, which is out of touch with normal people. And what we've got here is exactly that. Policy making that is completely out of touch with normal people, and policy making which normal people don't relate to. So you can imagine, imagine that we've just seen, a black migrant stabbing to death these 3 young girls, but the Conservative Party, higher up, saying, well, what we need at this very time is a black leader.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. I sort of hope they do, because the Conservative Party has to be made more and more of a joke. They need to lose all forms of legitimacy in the eyes of the British people. Like, they need to be on, I know it was a meme, they need to have 0 seats, like Sargon of Akkad, bringing it back to Sargon. They need to have 0 seats, because he's pushing for that. So would you say that, because here in New Zealand, we have a party called New Zealand First. They're sort of somewhat similar to UKIP reform. They're sort of anti-migration, but they're not necessarily pro-white. They're sort of all right, but they've got a lot of flaws. We've told our sort of listeners and supporters in the past to join the New Zealand First Party, try push it in a better direction. Would you say the sort of a good course for nationalists in the UK would be to join reform and hopefully push it
Absolutely.
in a more...
If you're an ethno-nationalist in the UK, you should be joining reform, you should be attending their meetings, and you should be pushing them in the right direction, because that is the simplest and easiest route to power. We should be trying to get young men who are desperate to be involved in politics, and we should be getting those young men, and we should be saying to them, look, if you actually want a realistic chance of getting elected to Parliament, join reform and work through that framework, that electoral framework. Because if you join a tiny nationalist micro party, you're not going to get elected. And if you did get elected, if you did do so, there is no organisation, there's no nationalist party in the UK that has any elected representation. So there's 650 MPs in Parliament, and no ethno-nationalist MPs. There are some Reform MPs, and there's about 19,500 council seats, elected council seats in the UK. And of those 19,500 elected council seats, again, there isn't a single one of those that's held by an ethno-nationalist. At this point, what do? Well, everyone's got to get behind the most likely route to power and then push our agenda through that likely route to power. And there is really, really good examples of how this works. If you look at the Democrat Party in the US, that has been completely taken over. That was at one point very much a sort of white working man's party that stood up for the interests.
Well, I mean,
of
all the Confederates were Democrat, so.
Well, look, exactly. Look, the fact is, that was a white working class movement. It is no longer. It's been taken over. It's been hijacked. And we now have a movement in this country where you can go to meetings and you can talk about mass immigration, you can talk about demographics, you can talk about the need to, preserve our culture. And you've got a realistic chance of getting elected to high office if you do go to those meetings and you do get stuck in and you do help them. That's not saying people should give up on ethno-nationalism. It means ethno-nationalists who are very unlikely to get elected, especially as you're going up against reform. So let's say I stood as a candidate, and this is like, going all out there and saying, right, stop the boats, deport them all now. We need this country to be a place where white Britons remain a majority. And I go full ham on it and say exactly what I mean, get a good campaign. But I'm up against a Reform Party candidate. I'm probably getting 0.5% of the vote. That is just how it is, because Reform's that household name. It's that juggernaut. It's the 600-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to mass immigration. So what I'm saying is the best thing we can do is use that gorilla, is direct it and get that gorilla, when it's on its rampage, to move in the right direction and do things that we find agreeable. And at that point, you are making change.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously don't change your views. I mean, don't get cut. Like, there's some people that join parties and then they suddenly become soft. It's happened before. I've seen it happen to people that I've known personally. They join a party. They go, oh, I'm going to turn it into the next, nationalist epic party. And then they just become a standard member of the party. It's like, oh, maybe I was a bit wrong,
Really?
I like to keep my
I couldn't
position in the
imagine doing
party.
that.
There's people that do it all the time. But yeah, you have to change the party, not change yourself for the party if you do join. And, joining, people call it infiltration. That is just not even true. Joining a political party is part of the democratic process. So joining a political party, voicing your concerns at the meetings, running for local council or whatever, it's all part of the democratic process. People like to shame nationalists and right-wing people. It's like, oh, it's infiltration. It's like, no, it's literally just the democratic process. So yeah, get involved in party politics if you want. And you should also, at the same time, be involved with spreading pro-white views, being against mass migration, being against globalism, being against communism, all these sort of, objectively negative influences in our societies. So everyone listening, whether you're in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, I mean, just get involved. It can't really help you. I mean, it can't do any harm. I mean, just be involved and I don't know. I guess there's
get a group of friends.
Yeah.
Even family. Get some guys. Hey, we all agree on this, right? Let's get involved and just talk to people, talk to the people there, and they'll just be happy to have some young guys around who are willing to just be quiet and listen to them and learn, and all you got to do is just really hang around and say, I'm here, I'm interested, and maybe I don't know a lot, but I want to learn. And they love to have young people around, and it helps liven the place, and so that's really important.
You've got the right.
Oh, sorry.
That's the guy who said you have to be English, you have to be white.
Oh well, it rhymes. It's like poetry. It rhymes. Also, Mark, I don't think I've heard anyone really comment, at least not in our sphere, What's the deal with the collapse of the SNP? Was that because they elected a Pakistani as their leader that turned out to be like a
Yeah,
literal
they
scammer?
they really, that guy was so obnoxious. Not only did they get him in, but the moment they got him in, he was like, right, hate crime laws, an end to free speech. No one's allowed to say that.
Typical.
If you weren't born in Scotland, you're not Scottish. He really went full ham on the anti-white thing and on the draconian policies. And at that point, the only people supporting that crap were the mainstream media. And when it comes down to it, this was exposed. This was absolutely exposed. People completely abandoned ship on the SNP, and he became he became one of Britain's most despised politicians sort of overnight. And again, it's a failure to read the room from the
Yeah.
political class, because
Well,
the political class are there cheering him on, talking about how he's taking on white privilege, how he's redefining the way British politics would view a Muslim man and all this. Now, obviously, in some areas of the country, like London, they elect a Muslim man. And I hate to say this, but that is representative. That is representative because, there are millions of Muslims in London. However, in Scotland, there are not millions of Muslims, and people who voted, it's one of the most homogenous areas in the UK.
Yeah.
And people voted in Scotland for white politicians, and he was somebody who I believe got in via the list system.
Yeah, he's a diversity hire. He's a diversity hire First Minister of Scotland.
Well, exactly. He was elected as First Minister by SNP ministers who wanted to make a progressive point. And the progressive point they made is they progressed themselves very rapidly out of power.
Yeah. Well, they might actually lose the next Scottish election. I don't know when the next Scottish election is. I think it might be in a year or two. But the Labour Party is polling ahead of the SNP for the first time in like 30 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's because of that. People don't want it. Look, the fact is, in many parts of the UK, there is still a visceral reaction to the idea that somebody of migrant descent should be running the country. Like, generally speaking, British people are quite fair to a fault, you would say, and sometimes too fair. And British people will say, oh, well, they've got representation in their own areas, or, they've elected their own politicians in their areas. But then they'll be like, but why, when we're a majority white country, do we have to have them ruling over us? We couldn't go to a Muslim area and represent, so why? And at that point, British people are saying, well, this is fundamentally unfair. And at the point they believe it to be unfair, then they disengage from it. And I believe there's been a huge amount of disengagement with this process because of decisions that have been made like that. And I think the SNP really shot themselves in the foot. And the fact that they were stupid enough to believe that was going to work out well for them is just unbelievable. And the fact that they were not only stupid enough to believe it was going to work out well, but they were actually then stupid enough to believe that he could come in and pass a raft of anti-white laws that took away everyone's freedom of speech, and that people were going to clap and call that progress. That tells you the SNP are just full of absolute dribbling idiots, and they basically just need, their own chances of retaining power. And I should imagine at the next Scottish election, despite, I don't think he's the leader of the party anymore. I think
one of these old guard took over. One of these guys that had been involved with the SNP. What was his name? John something took over. He's like a lifelong SNP guy involved with the party for 50 years.
But it's going to be very hard for them to take the room back, to get everyone listening. You know what I mean? People aren't going to want that, because they've been proven, they've proven themselves to be unrepresentative of Scotland. And it's also a cheek, isn't it? You call yourself a Scottish National Party, and your first, one of your first things you do is foist a non-white leader upon the country who takes the rights away from all true Scots to, say what a true Scot is. Well, that's gonna go down very badly, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Jason Walker in chat says the opposition Labour Party in Scotland is also led by a Pakistani. So, I don't know.
Oh God.
Maybe Labour should switch them out. Apparently, I also saw a chat earlier. Apparently, Labour has had the widest cabinet in the UK in like 2 decades. So that's sort of funny.
Well, look, Labour were very, very cheeky at the last general election. All their candidates put Union Jacks on their leaflets. Well, not all of them. The ones in white areas did. The one in my area, the nearest city to me, the MP who governs over that city, his office in the city centre is covered in, this giant Union Jack window vinyl. And it's obvious they know that people want patriotism. They know that people want an end to immigration, and they think that by rebranding themselves like the BNP, covered in Union Jacks, people will be like, oh wow, Labour represent me now. It's a very cynical ploy, but it does go to show that these establishment politicians, they will say and do things which are extremely disingenuous in order to attempt to garner, whatever public support they think they can have from normal people.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I don't know. Like you said, reform's not perfect, but it does seem like at least recently, Farage's rhetoric is becoming somewhat better. Like as we said before, there's people that call themselves like liberals, like classical liberals, like these UKIP types like Sargon, Nigel, all these people are coming more to our side, and that's also because, as I've said, like a broken record multiple times, we're right. We have the right worldview. Our worldview is based in facts, and we're just going to be constantly proven right. So we're going to have more and more people slowly come our way, whether it's liberals, whether it's people that were like, oh, I like you guys, but my family's voted Labour their entire life, like people that Mark Collett said he met. Like we're going to keep attracting more and more people to our worldview and our point of view because we just are constantly right all the time. It's our curse to bear.
Afraid so. So the time to be strong and extroverted and confident, within reason, while still being intelligent, is now. We've got it's sort of like a race against time to get as many people aware and awake as quickly as we can.
All right. I've got one more topic. I just wanted to talk about, Mark, your thoughts on the rest of the continent, because you had the EU election, you had the French election, the snap election. There's obviously like growing anti-establishment, anti-migration, anti-globalist sentiment growing all over the continent. Like, what do you think's the future of the EU? Like France, the National Rally got they got 37% of the vote, which is insane. That's more than what the Labour Party got in their recent election. And these are people that, like I said, 5 years ago had like 8 seats, and now they're winning the like popular vote. They didn't get the most actual seats because like the other parties basically all entered an electoral alliance against them. But like obviously the sentiment is growing and it's growing fast. So in other parts of the world, like Austria, the Freedom Party there, who openly call for the deportation of criminal migrants and unproductive, low-skilled migrants, they're ahead of all the other parties in the polls and will probably form the next government in Austria. Like, do you think the future of Europe is bright, or do you think that this sort of movement will fizzle out in the next 4 or 5 years?
Look, this isn't going to fizzle out because the people who remain in control of European countries are going to keep bringing in huge numbers of people. So the problems are only going to get worse. So the solutions will only become more radical. People are not going to go back to the only way you would get this to fizzle out is if our governments actually made changes. So if Keir Starmer came up, so look, emergency press conference, broadcasting to the whole nation today, 4 p.m. And he came out and said, look, we got it wrong. we have turned back the first small boats today, and he shows some footage of the Royal Navy turning boats back to France. He says we are now making moves to deport illegal migrants. The mood of the public is one that we can't ignore anymore, and we're going to make changes. Now, those changes will be purely symbolic, because around 50 to 60,000 migrants arrive here every year illegally. Around 1.5 to 2 million migrants arrive here every year legally. So it's still a drop in the ocean. Illegal immigration is a drop in the ocean compared to legal immigration. But if Starmer came out and said that today, and said he was really clamping down on these illegals, that would be enough to placate many people. However, he would still be bringing people here legally. So the issue is, I think the momentum could be staved off if establishment politicians said or did the right thing. Will they do that? No, I don't think they will. But if they did, it could cause a loss of momentum. However, despite them, making pledges about things such as illegal immigration, they're never ever going to turn down the heat when it comes to the masses of people flooding into this country legally. So that leaves us in a position which is clear to all. It's clear to all. These right-wing anti-immigration parties will continue to grow as the demography changes, because as demography changes, we come closer and closer to violent disorder, sectarianism, and a violent separation within our society. At that point, there has to be some kind of outlet. That outlet may be protest, it may be violence, but for many people it'll be voting for anti-establishment, anti-immigration parties. So I can see that rise continuing as time goes by.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about how you can, stave off the supposed far right, and there's actually one country in Europe that did it. In Denmark, the Social Democrats, they actually came to the completely logical conclusion that you can't really run a welfare state when you import a bunch of, 70 IQ blacks and 80 IQ Arabs that don't want to integrate to your society. So in terms of like reducing migration in Europe, it's sort of funny. The Social Democrat Party of Denmark is actually the one that's sort of done the most. They're already like deporting people back to Syria and like Egypt and stuff. It's pretty funny. So it is sort of interesting that if you don't want to have the rise of the far right or whatever you want to call it, just like have policies that benefit white people or like the native people of the country by not pandering to these, interloper savages from overseas. Like it's not that hard to figure out.
Right. That's right.
But yeah, I mean, because Denmark's like the exception to the rule, but because all these other parts of the world, this is obviously not going to happen. Like it's not going to happen in France, not going to happen in Germany, not going to happen in Austria. So yeah, the rise is inevitable until the situation improves, basically, and it's going to be that way until either there's deportations of interlopers or like our societies are destroyed. Like those are the only two end goals.
Look, you have to think about this, not from our point of view, but let's think about this from the point of view of non-white groups in Britain or on the continent or in America. Every non-white group in a Western nation that wanted change, that wanted sort of civil change, never gave up that fight. They continued, they fought, they protested, they wrote letters, they advocated, they built their own civil rights advocacy groups. And once they did that, they kept pressure on the system relentlessly until they got what they wanted. We must do the same. And we must do this through every avenue available to us. Now, if that means going out and voting for a slightly civic nationalist group because they're anti-immigration, it means voting for them. If it means going out and protesting, it means going out and protesting. If it means writing letters to MPs, signing petitions, whatever it is, we must do it. But we must view this not as we've traditionally viewed it. We have traditionally viewed all problems as solely political problems and as problems that must be dealt with via the ballot box alone. That has been a major flaw in white thinking. White thinking should not be focused simply on, electoral politics and the ballot box. We need to think of this not just politically, but as a civil rights struggle, as a movement for change, as a movement for us to be recognized as equals under the law. And if we look at it like that, and if we frame it in that way, it gives us far more options. It gives us a greater ability to fight for change, and we can base our actions on models that fundamentally have worked both here in the UK, on the continent, and in North America. We can't keep thinking that all that needs to be done is to go to the ballot box and put a tick in the box. This has to be, a multifaceted assault on the establishment by as many legal means as is necessary and that are available to us.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The struggle is going to be metapolitical. It's not just going to be vote for a party. It needs to be like a facet of your life. You need to advocate for our ideals, promote the ideals, stand up for native Europeans if you're in Europe, or, the founding stock of countries if you're in like Australia and New Zealand. You need to speak out against mass migration. You need to speak out against globalism and communism. It's like not that hard to figure out. Just use some common sense and we'll get there.
Of course. I mean, look in America, look at the movement of sit-ins. Why don't people think about, when a member of parliament who's pro-immigration holds an event, why don't we just go and peacefully sit in at their event with little signs around our necks, saying how many more children have to die? And on the count of three, we all just chant over and over again, how many white children have to die? How many white children have to die? And we just keep doing that and film it all until the event is shut down.
Yep.
That is what happened in America. And that tactic of peaceful, thoughtful, and, quite, thought-provoking resistance did wonders for the left and for black groups. We could do the same. When it comes down to it, these members of parliament have never ever been faced with white people doing things like this. So we should do them. And then if the police come in and start cracking our heads, we need GoPros. We need it all to be filmed. We need it to be uploaded. We need to, peaceful, non-violent resistance was met with, officers entering the room in riot gear with German shepherds, setting dogs on people, pepper spraying people and smacking them with truncheons. And at that point, you have a situation where you are essentially, raising awareness on multiple levels, because you're there peacefully calling for civil rights for white people, and then you're being baton charged. That's the only way to play it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's unfortunate that we've got to that state, but the thing is also with leftists, it took them generations to get to where they are now in control of, institutions, academia. We basically need to do the same thing in reverse and start building those parallel structures, start making our voices heard, start speaking out against the government, globalism, financial system, mass migration, multiculturalism, Zionism. These are all things we need to speak out against. And the movement is starting now. I guess on that point, I guess we should probably start wrapping it up because we've been going for 2.5 hours, so a bit longer than what we usually do. But do you see like the future of this like protest movement about, the Southport, the tragedy there in Ireland? There's been a, multi-year long protest movement against mass migration and resettling refugees there. Do you see something similar happening in the UK, or do you expect this to maybe just sort of, well, hopefully it doesn't, but maybe it will just fizzle out maybe after like a month? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Who knows? Who knows? It's very difficult to say. I hope it doesn't fizzle out. I hope it leads to a lasting protest movement. People do have a habit of just going back to normal life. But the fact of the matter is, we we need to do something. We need to keep the pressure up. And I've never in my entire life seen a response as I've seen over the last few days. And we need to keep that pressure up. But as I said, we just need to make sure we're peaceful, lawful, and that we log all these shocking acts of police brutality. And we must let the world see that there is a two-tier policing system in Britain. This two-tier policing system is the same system that has abolished all stop and search checks and refuses to single out these migrant killers, which allows them to get away with what they do. You've got to remember this killing in Southport, these killings in Southport came just a week after a British soldier was brutally attacked by another black outside a barracks in Kent. These things are not one-offs. They are now becoming weekly occurrences in Britain. They are the same people doing it. It is not just a Muslim issue, it is a migrant issue. We must keep the pressure up if we want a future for our children.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as we've said, we'll start wrapping it up. Everyone needs to get involved. If you're in the UK, I mean, the least you can do is read his book. Like we said, it's free. Read Mark's book, The Fall of Western Man. Great book. Be sure to read it. You can get the PDF.
Purchase a copy of it and give it to your friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely. Give it to your friends and family as a gift. Christmas
birthdays.
gift.
Yeah, Valentine's. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get involved. Join Reform. Join New Zealand First. Join, I don't know, whatever. National Rally in France, if we do have any French viewers. Get involved. Be part of that shift in the view of the public. We're getting there. Like, we are winning every day in terms of at least rhetoric, because we keep getting proven right. I mean, 5 years ago, no one was calling for mass deportation of migrants. Now you've got mainstream parties in Europe calling for exactly that. So we keep pushing the, I guess you'd call it the Overton window further to us. We need to keep doing that. We need to just keep winning. We need to be involved. Keep the conversation going. And in time, it might not even be that long. It might be generational, or it might be, 10 or 20 years. We're going to get there. I mean, the only two possibilities are either our civilization's destroyed, or, interlopers are expelled from our countries. Those are the only two logical endpoints of this current system we have. And hopefully it's the one where we just deport all the migrants and the non-whites from our societies. So I hope it's that one. And I think we're going towards that path. So, again, if you liked our stream, be sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on X and Telegram, Rumble and YouTube, our main platforms. Follow Mark on Odyssey, Telegram. What else are you on? Rumble, I think.
Yep.
A few others. Be sure to follow Mark.
Patriotic Alternative.
Yeah, Patriotic Alternative. Follow them. Get involved if you can. And as always, hope you enjoyed the stream. Thanks for everyone to watching. Thanks everyone watching the replay as well. It's been a great stream. Great to have Mark on. We'll have him back, no doubt, maybe when that local election happens, if he has time. It'll be interesting to talk about the results of that. As always, stay blessed, not stressed. Have a great weekend.
Okay. See you, everybody.
Thank you for having me on.
No worries. Happy to have